On May 4th, 2023, Ron Zambrano, the CEO of Razbam, declared that 2023 would be the year of the Strike Eagle. The reaction to this was interesting because it turned from joy to teasing as the F-15E release date moved deeper and deeper into 2023. But as we know, the module did release, and in a lot of ways, Ron had the last laugh. Looking back on 2023, it really feels like it was the year of the Strike Eagle because that was one of the few big things that happened last year. In this video, we have 2020 hindsight. We look back on last year and ask ourselves, was 2023 a good year in simming? Directing this conversation is you, respondents to our annual survey. A lot happened last year, and I would like to fire from the hip and drop some thoughts that I could not dedicate to specific videos, and also share the results of the survey. If this is your first time here, this channel focuses on multiplayer sim gameplay, so if you're into that, please subscribe. To start this, we are going to quickly rush through the first 5 or so survey questions, and then we will slow things way down and dedicate some time to give my point of view and my reaction to how people voted. First things first, let us get to know our respondents. There were around 965 people who took part in our survey. So not the biggest survey, but certainly not a small one. Working bottoms up, we see that the largest segment, or 40% of the respondents, has 10 plus years of experience in simming. The smallest segment is under 1 year of experience, which represents only 5.5%. For those new people, you have my condolences on your recent diagnosis of being a sim player. We also asked about VR. To my surprise, 46% responded that they use VR or sometimes use VR. Our data set seems to way over-index on VR usage versus industry surveys. For example, the December 2023 Steam hardware survey says only 1.8% of their users have a VR set. Next, we talk about playstyle, and we see that our respondents are basically the direct inverse of the DCS player base. Nearly 90% of the players play multiplayer or both, while only 10% played single player only. This is really important to highlight because it's probably safe to say that while our community is large, we are much more of a multiplayer community, and the DCS game is mostly populated with people who haven't graduated yet to multiplayer. They only play single player. For the last audience-based question, we had an odd one, which was for people to self-identify as a hoggeter or not. The reason why we asked all these audience questions was for people to self-identify is because we wanted to break out answers based on different audience groups. This Hogget question was one that we did not love because it doesn't really have a clear definition, but ironically it gave the clearest distinction with how people answered certain questions. Hogget, while it is a community that I don't really associate myself with, is an important community because it's really where a lot of people start off in DCS. And having a beginner-friendly area for people to congregate is important because the learning curve on these types of games has always been really steep. Now that we have the audience piece done, we can start getting into the interesting part. The first question was 2023 better for simulator gaming than 2022? 10% said no, 36% said it was the same, and 53% said it was better. So to start things off, people are leaning more in the direction that they think 2023 was a good year. Now for me, I have mixed feelings on this one. I will explain why through the next few questions. The next one was asking all of you, what was the best new sim game of 2023? I was actually really excited for this because I was hoping to find out about some new games that I did not know about. In general, the open form response basically ruined this question because most people just wrote down games that already existed. In the future, we will have to do this in 2 stages where we have a nomination phase and then a multiple choice for the final part where we have pruned down and validated the list. So in the spirit of wanting to salvage the original purpose of this question and give light to some games that people don't talk about a lot, I will give a few shout outs. In first place, after pruning out the games that didn't come out in 2023, is Nuclear Option. This game sort of came out of nowhere last year, and it has been really surprising to see how well put together it is, even though it's still in early access. It has a neat damage model. The game is actually really fun to play, and it plays a nice balance between simulating certain things in a believable way, like electronic warfare. Also, fun fact, the default multiplayer mode is basically 1-for-1 exactly what we wanted to do to build for ECW before we launched the server, but we couldn't do it because of DCS limitations. With that said, Nuclear Option was my personal vote for the best sim game for 2023. The runner-up was Flyout, which is an airplane designer game. This game is not really my sort of vibe, but I can see why people like it. And coming off of the total failure that was Kerbal Space Program 2, it makes sense that people would flock to this game. Next, we go into what was the best overall sim in 2023. A lot of people could not make up their mind, followed by 45% of the people voting for DCS. From there, it drops off really hard to BMS, IL2, Microsoft Flight Simulator, and VTOL VR. This is one of these questions that I would like to unpack and talk about for a while because I have some thoughts on this. I was really shocked and also not surprised by the results of this vote. I will start why I was shocked. From a multiplayer perspective, DCS was really rough last year. Now, what I'm about to say may sound a bit wild, but I will make sure that I ground things in numbers. When multi-threading released, we noticed immediately on our server that there was a problem. Any server that had air-to-ground gameplay noticed this. The servers that did not were just servers that catered to people just spamming missiles at each other because this bug was focused on bullets impacting the ground. When bullets hit the ground, they create a small crater, and these craters were causing permanent FPS loss for everyone on the server. This bug was introduced on March 10th, and it was fixed May 4th, or 61 days later. Next, we have the release of DCS 2.9. And what happened with this? There was some sort of memory leak going on, and it was messaged out by a lot of servers. It made the game unplayable for a lot of the large servers. This bug was introduced on October 10th, and it was not fixed until December 19th, or 70 days. All together, that is 131 days where the game was basically broken for multiplayer. So when we compare this to the 365 days in the year, we see that's 35%. So in other words, DCS multiplayer was broken 1 out of 3 days during 2023. Now, if someone were to ask me what game was the best in 2023, I would certainly not pick the game where my primary game mode was broken 1 out of 3 days in the year. Now, it was not all bad for DCS last year. DCS did release some long-awaited things. Multi-threading did come out. Now, while multi-threading's impact on being able to allow for more complicated scenarios in multiplayer did not come to be, it really can't be understated how smooth the multi-threading release was, because for such a major change, it really went smooth for DCS, and my limited understanding of this type of project is that this was a real technical feat. Along with that, just through the process of elimination, DCS was really the one that sort of weathered the post-COVID contraction better than the other games. IL2 Great Battles really suffered in 2023, and while DCS from my perspective contracted quite a bit in multiplayer, it's the only main sim game where you can find a server to play on at any hour in the day. BMS and IL2 Great Battles do not have the population to support 24/7 fully populated servers. For my personal vote, I actually did not really have a strong opinion on this, so I went NA. Next, we get into the labor of love, or which sim improved the most in 2023. This is very similar to the previous one, so I will not sit on this one for too long. The DCS improvements are clear and were just mentioned. I would like to focus my time on BMS. They made a huge technical achievement this year. They broke down one of the major barriers that was limiting the scale of that game. They can now do new airplanes with custom avionics, and they were able to release the F-15. Additionally, we see War Thunder here. And my reaction to them getting votes was based on the big economy changes they released. Next, we go to the game that lacked the most love in 2023. Most people went NA, and the next option was War Thunder, and then IL2 Great Battles. I personally went with IL2 Great Battles because the game shrank quite a bit, which is ironic because the game itself didn't get worse. It actually got better, but most of the community has totally moved on, so the game is not always playable now in multiplayer at any hour in the day. Now, for War Thunder, my reaction to this is I'm guessing people in this niche are just hating on War Thunder. And also, War Thunder is getting more modern. War Thunder is consistently getting more capable aircraft, and as it gets more modern aircraft that can fly faster, shoot farther away, then you suddenly make the same play space feel much smaller. To me, it looks like War Thunder is starting to hit its DCS moment, where the more capability planes are starting to make gameplay worse because they make things feel so clogged up with the amount of players that are playing. I'm really curious to see what the Snail does with this, and if they make their top tier lobbies smaller, because that could be an incredible thing. and it would be really interesting to see that happen. Now for the next part, we can do a quick fire round of what people thought of the modules in 2023. We see that most people thought the F15E was the best module release last year, and I tend to agree, so congratulations to Razbam. With everyone trying to find their footing post-COVID, it looks like Razbam was able to hit a stride and not just release, but also have a pretty smooth release in general. Next is the module that improved the most in 2023. Most people went with the Apache. I did not really have a strong opinion on this one. I wanted to vote for the Mirage F1 because of the additional releases, but I am also nervously waiting for the radar on that Mirage F1 to get updated. Next is which module worsened the most last year. Skipping over NA, we have combined arms, F5, Supercarrier, and then MiG-21. My vote on this one was for the MiG-21 because of the bug that the MiG-21 no longer gives launch warnings when it launches its R3R missile. Now, why did combined arms get voted? It got voted because being a GCI has been broken since 2.9's release. Contacts fade off the map, and it's basically useless now. For maps, we see that people think Syria was the map that improved the most last year. For the map that worsened, there was nothing super definitive. Both these questions seem to be kind of a wash. From here, we transition to the last part of the video, which is the future outlook on things. Keep in mind the scale is 1 to 7, where 1 is very negative, 4 is neutral, and 7 is very optimistic. For people's outlook on combat flight simming, most people are pretty positive. Only 13% of people voted below neutral, and around the same number also were neutral. Only 13% of people voted below neutral, and around the same number also were neutral. So basically a quarter of the respondents are not positive. We also have a breakout for the population that identified as a Hoggeter versus the ones that did not. And we see that the Hogget users are more positive looking than users who do not identify as a Hoggeter. Next, we have BMS. People are very optimistic for this game. 72% voted positively and 8% voted negatively. We also see that the Hoggeters are way more optimistic than non-Hoggeters. I have a lot to say about this one. I'm starting to notice something where a lot of people lament things about the current games, praise BMS, but then never actually play BMS. Please take a moment and think about how many people do you know who said they would check out BMS, but said they couldn't until VR came out. What happened? VR came out and it seems like there wasn't a huge rush to BMS. How many people said they wanted to play BMS, but wanted to fly the Eagle and not the F-16? The Eagle came out, and again, there still hasn't been a huge rush. BMS has done a ton of work, specifically addressing feedback and requests from the community. VR, a new key mapper, the F-15, and soon a whole graphics overhaul, and then people just never seem to bother installing BMS. It's very odd to me, and just something I want to call out. So curious what people think about this in the comments. I really have to give a shout out to the BMS devs because they truly are saints, and I really hope people can look past the skin deep graphics and really immerse themselves in the gameplay that BMS has to offer. Next, we have DCS. People are basically as optimistic as BMS, with 72% voting positive, but 17% are negative. So there's more definitive answers on this one, and less people are sitting in the middle as neutral. Ironically for me, I found myself to be kind of in the neutral camp. I think the core engine changes with multi-threading should be applauded, but while those things are good, it didn't really allow anything net new to happen scenario-wise in multiplayer. My future outlook on DCS totally sits and relies on what core gameplay and core engine changes come. If they come, I'm optimistic. Next, IL2 Cliffs at Dover. I wish I could play this game, but I cannot get past the UI, and I feel like I'm not the only one. Despite them announcing something new, there was a non-trivial amount of people who had a negative outlook on this game. I don't take joy in saying this, so this sucks. I feel like on paper, IL2 Cliffs at Dover should be really popular because its engine has a lot of scale potential, but the damn game is just a chore to try to get into. Hoggeters seem to be more positive on Cliffs at Dover than not Hoggeters. Next, we have IL2 Great Battles. I take no joy in saying this because I really love IL2 Great Battles, and I think out of all of the sims in the market right now, it's probably the best one for everyday play. This game basically became hard to play in 2023. When I say hard, I mean it is not possible to play on a populated multiplayer server at any hour in the day. I already did a big video on this, so I don't need to rehash it, but it looks like most of you were in agreement. The only other thing to add to this is that Hoggeters were more negative on IL2 Great Battles than non-Hoggeters. Next, we have the new IL2 unannounced project. Now, at the time of this survey, it was not public yet what was coming. It is now publicly known that it is going to be Korea. So this explains why so many people were neutral on it, because they did not know. In general, I'm excited to see a new theater being done, and out of everyone doing it, it's probably best that IL2 does it. Korea is a theater that has so little attention on it, so IL2, who generally has a good history of actually tackling things at a theater level, will probably do it justice. Additionally, I think it'll be really interesting to see how IL2 stepping into the Jet era puts pressure on DCS. Korea has been an area that no one has put any real concerted effort into. DCS already has the MiG-15 and the Sabre modeled, but in true DCS fashion, they did nothing past the actual airplane. So this is fertile ground, and now we see some competition. In some ways, IL2 tackling Korea is the first time in recent times that someone is trying to tackle jets at a theater level instead of just focusing on the cockpit. They are looking at the entire theater. So to me, this seems like a really good idea. Understanding what is core to an experience to make things immersive seems infinitely more interesting rather than executing a checklist of what buttons does what in a cockpit. As more time goes by, I really do think that the individual airplanes are not that important for a flight sim, but rather it's how the planes live together and live within their environment is what makes a combat flight sim game actually interesting. Next, we have War Thunder. People are super negative on this game. I just want to say one crazy thing about War Thunder that is going to piss off a lot of people. I don't think people realize how close War Thunder is to being great. These games are hard to make, from World War II Online to DCS and everything in between. These games have always had an issue with resources. War Thunder is the one game that has managed to be the exception to this rule. It's just so big that it's honestly unfair to the other games to mention War Thunder alongside them. Yes, War Thunder may have the least amount of fidelity, but the thing is, the snail is powerful. Let's contextualize this. War Thunder started to release new jets in 1.33 back in late 2013. This was when they started to release post-World War II jets. That's about 10 years ago. Since then, War Thunder has been pretty much able to model every single jet that has ever existed between World War II to the F-15, more or less. Now compare this to DCS, where we see the first mention of the F-15E in 2012, and the release was last year. Basically the same time frame. I don't say this to make fun of DCS or Razbam. I make this comparison to make people aware at just the sheer potential War Thunder has. The snail really is powerful, and if it ever got bored of making money, it could really take on anything and have the resources to do it. So while I do not expect War Thunder to take on more theater level scenarios like BMS or IL2 Great Battles, one does wonder that if they were ever to do it, it would be worth keeping tabs on, because the snail can marshal a significant amount of muscle. Next, we go into Falcon 5 and Combat Pilot. These are the two new games coming up. People are very optimistic for these. I will say, out of all the games, the one I am most optimistic for, and the one that really keeps me going, is Combat Pilot. And I really think the way that these developers are talking and thinking about their game really gives a lot of potential. If you aren't familiar with Combat Pilot, check out the interview that I had with the lead producer in the top right. Lastly, I want to mention GHPC. These developers have been silent workhorses, steadily releasing content updates for their game and fleshing out the bones. Even though I don't post a ton of videos about this game, I am watching the development of this game very closely. And when they release multiplayer, I'm fully expecting this to become one of my main games. Out of all of the games, people seem to be the most optimistic about this one. Lastly, to close up the survey, I asked if we are still in a sim gaming dark age or not. 42% think that we are still in a sim gaming dark age. 19% believe we were in one but are no longer in it. 39% believe we were never in one to begin with. So basically 4 out of 10 think yes and 6 out of 10 think no. A non-trivial amount on either side. I wanted to post this question, one to be cheeky, and the other thing was to anniversary the posting of the Sim Gaming Dark Age video. A lot of people have asked me what I think of my video 1 year after the fact. In general, I think as more time has gone by, I think the points I made are becoming more clear and apparent, and more people who did not understand it then are starting to understand it now, and I've heard a lot of people mention this to me. Ideally though, the video would have been met with an upswing of things, but it looks like things had to get worse before they get better. For me, the theme of 2023 was that DCS finally got some major things done, like multi-threading. BMS broke through a massive barrier and are tackling new planes. IL2 Great Battles sadly atrophied, and it is not always playable anymore, and that there is a new pipeline of new games coming like Combat Pilot. So in short, the immediate playability of things right now doesn't necessarily feel better in 23, probably feels worse. but the future feels like it has a lot more potential and it looks more concrete than it did at the end of 2022. I hope you found this video interesting. If you did, please consider subscribing. Let me know your reaction to how I interpreted some of the results and how I rationalized some of my own thoughts in the comments below. Thanks and have a good one.